The first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh sawdust drifting through my woodlot at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in late September. I had pulled my truck onto the gravel turnout by the old logging gate, the one my father and I had installed 23 years ago when we first started managing this 47-acre parcel under a long-term timber plan. The gate was open, not just unlocked, swung wide and pinned back against the fence post with a bungee cord that was not mine. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence that should have been full of morning birdsong, but instead carried the distant rhythmic thump of something metallic being driven into soil. I stepped out of the truck and the sawdust smell got stronger. Fresh-cut branches were piled in a messy heap about 30 feet inside the tree line. The cut ends were pale and raw, still bleeding sap. These were not storm-felled limbs. These were deliberate cuts. I walked deeper into the woodlot, following the sound, and that was when I saw the first disc golf basket. It stood in a small clearing that had not existed the week before. Someone had cleared brush, cut back undergrowth, and installed a bright yellow powder-coated chain basket on a galvanized pole sunk into a concrete footing. A laminated sign was zip-tied to the pole. It read, Hole 4, Par 3, 210 feet, in cheerful green letters with the HOA logo printed in the corner. I stood there staring at that basket for a long time. The morning light was filtering through the canopy, and I could see more baskets in the distance, a chain of them winding through my trees like some kind of invasive species. My trees, my managed timber, my woodlot that had been under a recorded forestry plan since before half the people in this subdivision had ever heard of this county. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. Then I walked back to my truck, opened the glove box, and pulled out the folder I kept there for my quarterly inspections. Inside was the timber plan, the tree inventory, the valuation report, and the contact information for my forester, a man named Dale Renshaw who had been walking this land with me for over a decade. I called him before I did anything else. Dale, I said when he answered. Someone's built a disc golf course in my woodlot. There was a long pause. Then Dale said, Tell me you're joking. I'm standing next to hole 4. Don't touch anything, he said. I'll be there in 40 minutes. I hung up and leaned against the hood of my truck. The morning was warming up and I could hear more sounds now. Voices, laughter, the clink of chains. I walked further in and found 3 people I did not recognize throwing discs through my forest. One of them, a man in his 20s wearing a tie-dye shirt and hiking sandals, waved at me like I was a fellow player. Morning, he called out. Course is playing great today. You here for the league preview? I did not answer right away. I took another picture. Then I said, Who told you this course was open? He looked confused. The HOA. Karen sent out the email last week. Said the new recreation course was ready for play. There's a league starting Saturday. Karen, of course it was Karen. Karen Whitmore, the HOA recreation chair, the woman who had been on the board for 6 years and treated the entire subdivision like her personal kingdom. The woman who had once tried to fine me for the color of my mailbox and who had never quite forgiven me for pointing out at a board meeting that my property was not actually inside the HOA's jurisdiction for architectural control. My woodlot was private land. It had always been private land. It was not common area. It was not HOA property. It was not part of the subdivision's recreational amenities. It was a managed forest parcel with its own tax ID, its own recorded timber plan, and its own long history that predated the HOA by 30 years. And Karen Whitmore had just built a disc golf course on it. I walked back to the gate and waited for Dale. While I waited, I called my son, Ethan, who was 22, and had grown up helping me walk this land, learning to identify trees and measure diameter at breast height, and understand the slow, patient economics of timber management. Dad, he said when I told him, tell me you're kidding. I wish I was. Did she cut the marked trees? That was the question. The question that made my stomach tighten. Because this woodlot was not just a pretty forest. It was a working timber parcel. Every tree of harvestable size was marked, inventoried, and valued. The paint marks were still visible on the trunks if you knew what to look for. Blue dots for the trees scheduled for the next selective harvest. Orange rings for the specimen trees we were growing out for veneer quality logs. Red X marks for the hazard trees we were monitoring. If Karen's volunteers had been cutting brush and clearing fairways without knowing what they were looking at, they could have damaged marked timber. They could have cut down trees that were part of the valuation. They could have disrupted a forestry plan that had legal standing with the county and the State Department of Natural Resources. This was not just trespass. This was timber trespass. And timber trespass had teeth. Dale arrived in his green Forest Service surplus truck, and the look on his face when he saw the open gate told me everything I needed to know about how bad this was going to be. He was a tall man in his 60s with a gray beard and hands that had planted more trees than most people had ever seen. He had been my father's forester before he was mine. He knew this land almost as well as I did. "Show me," he said. We walked the course together. It took us over an hour to cover the full 18 holes. By the time we finished, Dale had filled 6 pages of his field notebook with observations, and I had taken over 100 photographs. The damage was worse than I had initially thought. Much worse. The disc golf course had been laid out by someone who clearly knew the game, but knew nothing about forestry. Fairways had been cut through stands of managed timber. Brush had been cleared from around specimen trees, exposing their root systems and damaging the understory that protected the soil. Several trees had been painted with bright white directional arrows and hole numbers, the paint sprayed directly onto the bark of trees that were part of the timber inventory. And in 3 separate locations, we found fresh stumps. Someone had cut down trees. Not large ones, thankfully, but trees nonetheless. Trees that had been marked, trees that were part of the plan. Dale knelt beside one of the stumps and ran his finger over the cut surface. "This was a marked white oak," he said quietly. 12-inch diameter, part of the next harvest rotation. They cut it down to clear a sight line for a basket. He looked up at me. "Mora, this is serious. This is not just a property dispute. This is interference with a recorded timber plan. The state takes this seriously. The county takes this seriously. And your timber valuation, the one we updated last year for the tax assessment, that valuation is based on the standing timber inventory. If the inventory has been damaged, the valuation is compromised. That's a legal problem for whoever did the damage." I nodded slowly. I was not angry yet. I was still in that calm, observant space that I had learned to occupy during my 20 years as a civil engineer. The space where you gather data before you make decisions, where you document before you confront, where you let the facts accumulate like water behind a dam until you are ready to release them all at once. "What do we need to do?" I asked. "First, we document everything. I'm going to do a full damage assessment. I'll need to compare the current condition against the last inventory. I'll mark every damaged tree, every cut stump, every painted trunk. I'll calculate the timber value loss and the restoration cost. That report will be your foundation." He paused. "Second, you need to notify the HOA in writing, certified mail, today. Tell them to cease all activity on your property immediately. Third, you need to contact your insurance company and the county forestry office. And fourth," he looked at the nearest disc golf basket, the cheerful yellow chains glinting in the morning sun. "Fourth, you need to decide how hard you want to push, because timber trespass in this state can carry treble damages, 3 times the value of the timber, plus restoration costs, plus survey costs, plus legal fees. If that course damaged as many trees as I think it did, we could be talking about a significant amount of money." I looked at the basket, at the laminated sign, at the fresh sawdust on the ground, and I thought about my father, who had bought this land in 1972, who had planted the first trees with his own hands, who had taught me that a forest was not just a collection of trees but a promise you made to the future. He had been gone for 8 years now, but his voice was still in these woods. His handwriting was still on the old timber plan documents in my folder. His initials were still carved into the corner post of the logging gate. And Karen Whitmore had opened that gate and treated his forest like a playground. "I want to push," I said. "Hard." Dale nodded. "Then let's get to work." We spent the rest of the morning walking the property line, photographing every basket, every sign, every cut branch, every painted tree. Dale used his GPS unit to mark the location of each damaged tree and cross-referenced them against the timber inventory database on his tablet. By noon, we had a preliminary count: 18 baskets installed, 47 trees with spray paint damage, 12 trees with bark damage from clearing activities, 3 cut stumps, and approximately 2 acres of understory cleared without authorization. The course wound through the most valuable section of the woodlot, the northeast corner where the best white oaks and black walnuts were growing. The section we had been nursing for the past 15 years toward a premium timber sale that was supposed to fund my retirement. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had handled my property matters for years, and who had a particular talent for making HOA boards regret their life choices. I explained the situation while standing next to hole 7, which had been placed directly beneath a marked veneer-quality black walnut that was worth more than some people's cars. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then she said, "Maura, I need you to send me everything: the timber plan, the valuation, the photos, the forester's preliminary report. And I need you to not speak to Karen Whitmore or anyone from the HOA until I've reviewed the documents. Can you do that?" "I can do that." "Good. Because based on what you've described, this is not a small claims matter. This is a significant property damage case, with potential statutory damages under the timber trespass statute. And if the HOA's insurance policy has a provision for unauthorized activities by board members acting outside their authority, which it almost certainly does, then Karen Whitmore may have just personally exposed herself to liability that her insurance will not cover." She paused again. "One more thing. You said there's a disc golf league scheduled for Saturday?" "That's what the player told me." "Then we have a deadline. I want to have a cease and desist letter delivered to the HOA board by Thursday, and I want to have the county forestry office aware of the situation before the weekend. If those players show up on Saturday and cause more damage, the liability compounds. We need to stop that from happening." I hung up and looked at Dale. "She wants everything documented by Thursday." Dale nodded. "I'll have the preliminary damage report ready by Wednesday evening. I'll also pull the satellite imagery from the county GIS. We can show the condition of the woodlot before the course was installed. That will make the damage visually obvious." The next 3 days were a blur of documentation, phone calls, and quiet preparation. I did not contact Karen. I did not contact the HOA board. I did not post anything on the neighborhood social media page, even though I saw posts from excited residents talking about the new disc golf course and thanking Karen for her hard work in creating a new community amenity. One post in particular caught my attention. It was from a woman named Denise, who identified herself as the HOA treasurer. She wrote, "A big thank you to Karen Whitmore and the Recreation Committee for the amazing new disc golf course. The league starts Saturday at 9 a.m. Come out and play." Below it, Karen had replied, "So happy to bring this to our community." It took a lot of work and some creative problem solving to find the right location, but I think everyone will agree it was worth it. See you Saturday. Creative problem solving. That was one way to describe building a recreational facility on private property without permission. I took a screenshot of the exchange and added it to my growing evidence folder. On Wednesday afternoon, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. It was a young woman named Chloe, who introduced herself as a volunteer with the HOA Recreation Committee. She sounded nervous. "Ms. Chen?" she said. "I'm sorry to bother you. I got your number from the HOA directory. I'm one of the volunteers who helped install the disc golf course. I wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead." "When we were working out there last week, Karen told us the land was HOA common area. She said the board had approved the course location months ago. But I was looking at the county parcel map online, and it looks like that parcel is, well, it's listed under your name, not the HOA. I'm confused." I felt a small surge of respect for this teenager who had done what apparently no adult on the HOA board had bothered to do: check the public records. "You're right," I said. "That parcel is private property. It's been in my family for over 50 years. It's not HOA common area. It never has been." There was a long pause. Then Chloe said, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. We cut down trees. We painted trees. We dug holes. Karen said it was fine. She said she had checked everything." "Chloe," I said carefully, "you're a volunteer. You were following instructions from someone who told you she had authority. I'm not going to hold you responsible for that. But I need to ask you something. Do you have any of Karen's instructions in writing? Emails? Text messages? Anything that shows she told you the land was HOA property?" Another pause. Then, "I have the group chat. The whole recreation committee is on it. Karen sent us maps and instructions and told us where to put each basket. She said the land was part of the HOA's undeveloped green space. Can you send me screenshots of that chat?" I asked. I don't want to get in trouble." "Chloe, you're not in trouble. But the person who gave you those instructions might be. And those screenshots could help make sure the right person is held responsible." She agreed to send them. When they arrived, they were more damning than I had expected. Karen had sent detailed maps with basket locations marked. She had written messages like, "The land behind the old logging gate is HOA green space. We have full access." And, "Don't worry about the paint marks on the trees. Those are old and don't mean anything." And, "If anyone asks, tell them you're with the HOA Recreation Committee, and you have authorization." The paint marks were old and didn't mean anything. That line made me close my eyes and take a deep breath. Those paint marks were part of a professional timber inventory, conducted by a licensed forester. They were the foundation of a timber valuation that had been filed with the county tax assessor. They meant everything, and Karen had told her volunteers to ignore them. On Thursday morning, Dale delivered his preliminary damage report. It was 23 pages long, with photographs, GPS coordinates, tree inventory cross-references, and a detailed calculation of timber value loss. The total came to $47,850 in direct timber damage, plus an estimated $12,300 in restoration costs to repair the understory damage and remove the installed equipment. And that was before treble damages. Patricia reviewed the report and sent the cease and desist letter to the HOA board by certified mail and email. The letter demanded that all disc golf equipment be removed from the property within 7 days, that all further league activities be canceled immediately, and that the HOA preserve all records related to the installation of the course. It also notified the HOA that a formal claim for timber trespass damages would be filed. The response came faster than I expected. At 4:47 p.m. on Thursday, my phone rang. It was Karen Whitmore. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. On the fourth call, I answered. "Maura Chen," Karen said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "What is the meaning of this letter? This is outrageous. That land is HOA green space. It has always been HOA green space. Everyone knows that." "No," I said calmly. "It's private managed forest land. It's been in my family since 1972. It has its own tax parcel number. It's not part of the HOA. It never has been. That's ridiculous. The board has always treated that area as community space. The walking trails go through there. People have been using it for years. People have been trespassing for years," I said. "I've tolerated it because the walking trails didn't cause damage. Building a disc golf course is different. Cutting down trees is different. Damaging marked timber that's part of a recorded forestry plan is very different. Marked timber? What are you talking about? Those were just trees. Overgrown brush. We were improving the area." I closed my eyes and counted to 3. "Karen, you cut down trees that were part of a professional timber inventory. You painted trees that are valued at thousands of dollars each. You cleared understory that was protecting the root systems of specimen trees. My forester has documented over $60,000 in damages, and that's before the statutory multiplier for timber trespass." There was a long silence. When Karen spoke again, her voice had changed. The fury was still there, but now there was something else underneath it. Fear. "You're bluffing. You're just trying to cause trouble because you don't like the HOA. I'm not bluffing. You'll receive the full damage report and the timber valuation tomorrow. I suggest you forward it to the HOA's insurance carrier, and I suggest you cancel the disc golf league on Saturday. If more people come onto my property and cause more damage, the liability only increases. You can't stop the league. People are excited about this. The whole community is looking forward to it. You're going to ruin it for everyone because of some trees? They're not just some trees," I said. "They're my trees, on my land, and you had no right to touch them." I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I received a call from Denise, the HOA treasurer. She sounded shaken. "Miss Chen, I just saw the cease and desist letter, and I've been looking at the county records. I didn't know." Karen told the board the land was HOA property. She said she had verified it. I voted to approve the recreation budget based on her representation. If I had known, she trailed off. "You're the treasurer," I said. "You have access to the HOA's property records. Did anyone on the board actually check the parcel map before approving the course?" "No," she said quietly. "We trusted Karen. She's been the recreation chair for years. She's always handled these things." "Well," I said, "now you know what happens when you trust without verifying." On Friday morning, I drove to the county forestry office and met with a man named Gerald Okonkwo, who was no relation to my attorney, but who had been the county's forestry compliance officer for 15 years. I showed him Dale's report, the photographs, and the timber plan. He listened carefully, asked questions, and then pulled up the satellite imagery on his computer. "I can see the disturbance," he said, pointing at the screen. This area here, that's recent clearing, and these linear paths through the canopy. That's consistent with the fairway cuts you described. He leaned back in his chair. Ms. Chen, I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've seen a lot of timber trespass cases. Most of them are straightforward. A neighbor cuts down trees on the wrong side of the property line, or a logger strays outside the harvest boundary. But this, an HOA building a recreational facility on private forest land without permission? This is a new one. Is it a violation? I asked. It's multiple violations. Trespass, timber trespass, interference with a recorded timber plan, potential violation of the state's Forest Practices Act if the clearing affected water quality or wildlife habitat. And if the HOA used any contractors who weren't licensed for forestry work, there could be additional issues. He made some notes. I'm going to open a file on this. I'll need to do a site visit, but based on your forester's report, I can already tell you this is going to be a significant case. The timber trespass statute is clear. Unauthorized cutting of marked timber on recorded forest land carries treble damages. And the fact that the HOA was warned, or should have been warned, by the visible paint marks on the trees, that doesn't help their position. I left the forestry office with a case number and a growing sense that the machinery of accountability was already in motion. All I had to do was let it run. Saturday morning arrived gray and cool, with a light drizzle that made the forest smell of wet earth and pine. I parked my truck at the logging gate at 8:15 a.m. and waited. Dale was with me, along with Patricia, who had driven out from the city to be present for what she called the inevitable confrontation. At 8:30, the first cars started arriving. Sedans and SUVs and a few trucks, pulling into the gravel turnout and parking along the shoulder of the access road. People got out carrying disc golf bags and folding chairs and coolers. They were laughing and chatting, excited for the first league day of the new course. Karen Whitmore arrived at 8:45 in her white Lexus SUV. She was wearing a bright pink polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest and carrying a clipboard. She looked like she was in charge. She looked like she owned the place. When she saw me standing by the gate, her expression hardened. She marched over, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Maura, this is a community event. You need to leave. You're trespassing on HOA property. I did not move. Karen, this is my property. I have the deed. I have the tax records. I have the recorded timber plan. You have nothing. The board has authorized this event. The Recreation Committee has invested hundreds of hours in this course. You can't just show up and ruin it. I'm not ruining anything. I'm protecting my property from further damage. The cease and desist letter was clear. The course is unauthorized. The league is unauthorized. Anyone who enters my land today is trespassing. By now, a crowd had gathered. 30 or 40 people, disc golf players, and curious neighbors, standing in a loose semicircle around us. I recognized some of them. The man in the tie-dye shirt from Tuesday. Chloe, the teenage volunteer, standing at the back of the crowd with her phone in her hand. Denise, the treasurer, looking pale and anxious. And a man I did not recognize. A tall man in a polo shirt with an insurance company logo on the chest, standing off to the side with a notebook. Karen raised her voice, playing to the crowd. Everyone, I apologize for this disruption. Ms. Chen has some personal issues with the HOA, and she's decided to take it out on the community. The board has confirmed that this land is HOA property. The course is legal. The league will proceed as scheduled. I let her finish. Then I reached into my folder and pulled out a document. This is the recorded deed for parcel number 14-7-203-019, dated 1972. It shows that this 47-acre parcel is owned by the Chen Family Trust. It is not part of the HOA. It has never been part of the HOA. The HOA's own plat map, which I obtained from the county recorder's office yesterday, does not include this parcel. I held up a second document. This is the HOA's recorded plat map. You can see the subdivision boundaries clearly marked. My woodlot is outside those boundaries. It always has been. I held up a third document. This is the timber plan, recorded with the county in 2015 and updated in 2022. It identifies every tree of harvestable size on this property and assigns a value to each one. The trees that your volunteers cut down and painted and damaged are on this inventory. Their value is documented. And under state law, unauthorized damage to marked timber on recorded forest land carries treble damages. Crowd had gone very quiet. Karen's face had gone very red. Those documents are fake, she said. You fabricated them. Patricia stepped forward. She was wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather briefcase, and she looked exactly like what she was, an attorney who had been doing this for 20 years and had never lost a property case. Ms. Whitmore, I'm Patricia Okonkwo, Ms. Chen's attorney. These documents are certified copies from the county recorder's office. They are not fake, and I should inform you that the county forestry office has opened a formal investigation into the timber damage on this property. The case number is CF 2024-0873. You can verify that with the county on Monday. She paused. I should also inform you that the HOA's insurance carrier has been notified of the claim. The adjuster is here today. She gestured toward the man in the polo shirt, who raised his hand awkwardly. I'm just here to observe, he said. The claim has been filed. We'll be conducting our own investigation. Karen stared at him, then at Patricia, then at me. The clipboard was shaking in her hands. This is a misunderstanding. The board will sort this out. We'll have an emergency meeting. The board has already been notified, Denise said quietly from the crowd. I called an emergency meeting for Monday. The recreation budget is frozen pending the investigation. Karen whirled on her. You did what? Without consulting me? You told us the land was HOA property, Denise said. You told us you had verified it. You didn't. The board trusted you, and you lied to us. Or you were careless. Either way, the HOA is now facing a six-figure liability because of your mistake. The crowd was murmuring now. People were looking at Karen differently. The confident recreation chair who had promised them a new amenity was suddenly looking very small and very exposed. The league is canceled, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The course is closed. The baskets and signs will be removed. If anyone enters my property today, I will consider it trespassing, and I will document it for the ongoing legal case. I looked at Karen. You built a disc golf course on private forest land without permission. You damaged marked timber. You disrupted a recorded forestry plan. You exposed the HOA to significant legal and financial liability. And you did it all because you assumed you had authority you never actually had. I stepped closer to her, close enough that only she could hear my next words. My father planted some of those trees with his own hands. He taught me that a forest is a promise you make to the future. You broke that promise because you wanted a disc golf course, and now you're going to pay for every single tree. I turned and walked back to my truck. Dale and Patricia followed. Behind us, the crowd was dispersing, people drifting back to their cars, their disc golf bags unused, their Saturday morning plans ruined. Karen was standing alone by the gate, her clipboard hanging at her side, her pink polo shirt looking suddenly garish against the gray morning light. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks with the slow, grinding inevitability of legal machinery. The HOA's emergency board meeting on Monday was apparently chaotic. Denise sent me a summary afterward. Karen had been removed as recreation chair by a vote of 4-1. The board had voted to hire an attorney to represent the HOA's interests. The recreation budget had been frozen, and a formal investigation had been launched into how the disc golf course had been approved without proper verification of property ownership. The insurance adjuster completed his investigation 2 weeks later. His report was thorough and damning. He found that Karen had acted outside her authority as recreation chair, that the HOA board had failed to exercise proper oversight, and that the damage to the timber was consistent with unauthorized clearing activities. The insurance company agreed to cover the direct damages, the $47,850 in timber value loss, and the $12,300 in restoration costs. But they denied coverage for any treble damages or punitive claims, citing a policy exclusion for intentional or unauthorized acts by board members. That meant the treble damages, which could push the total claim over $180,000, would have to be paid by the HOA itself, or by Karen personally. Patricia filed the formal complaint in county court on a Monday in late October. The complaint named the HOA and Karen Whitmore as defendants, and sought damages under the state's timber trespass statute, including treble damages for the marked timber, restoration costs, survey costs, and legal fees. The total claim was $187,450. The HOA's attorney, a man named Richard something or other who sounded exhausted every time I spoke to him, called Patricia 3 days after the complaint was filed and asked if we would consider a settlement. Patricia told him we would consider it, but only if the settlement included a full admission of liability. a permanent injunction against any future use of my property by the HOA, and payment of the full direct damages, plus a significant portion of the treble damages. The negotiations took 6 weeks. During that time, the disc golf baskets were removed from my woodlot by a contractor hired by the HOA's insurance company. I watched them do it, standing by the logging gate with a cup of coffee, as the cheerful yellow baskets were pulled out of the ground one by one and loaded onto a flatbed truck. The holes were filled, the signs were taken down, the painted trees were still painted, but the paint would fade over time. The stumps would remain, slowly rotting back into the soil. The forest would heal. Forests are good at that. In early December, we reached a settlement. The HOA agreed to pay $165,000 in damages, to issue a formal written apology acknowledging that the disc golf course had been built on private property without authorization, and to record a permanent easement restriction preventing any future HOA use of my woodlot. Karen Whitmore was required to personally pay $15,000 of the settlement amount, which the HOA board agreed to deduct from her future board compensation and any HOA fees she would otherwise have been exempt from as a board member. She was also permanently barred from serving on the HOA board or any HOA committee. The settlement was read into the record at a board meeting in mid-December. I attended that meeting, sitting in the back of the community center folding chair, watching as Denise read the terms aloud to a room full of residents. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then someone started clapping. It was Chloe, the teenage volunteer, sitting in the front row. After a moment, others joined in. Not everyone. Some people still glared at me like I was the villain who had taken away their disc golf course. But enough people clapped that Karen Whitmore, sitting in the corner with her arms crossed and her face pale, had to sit there and listen to her neighbors applaud her downfall. After the meeting, Denise approached me in the parking lot. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. "Not for the lawsuit, for forcing us to actually look at what was happening." Karen had been running the recreation committee like her own personal fiefdom for years. Nobody questioned her because she was so confident. She made everyone believe she knew what she was doing, and we all just went along with it. She shook her head. "The board is changing now. We're implementing new oversight procedures. Every project has to be verified against county records before it's approved. No more trusting someone just because they sound like they know what they're talking about." "That sounds like a good policy," I said. "It should have been the policy all along. I'm sorry it took a lawsuit to make it happen." I drove home that evening through the winter darkness, the headlights of my truck cutting through the mist that rose from the wet roads. When I reached the logging gate, I stopped and got out. The gate was closed, locked. The bungee cord was gone. The sawdust had been washed away by autumn rains. The forest was quiet, the way it was supposed to be. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. The wind moved through the trees, and I could hear the bare branches clicking together, the sound of a forest settling into winter dormancy. My father's voice was still there, somewhere in the rustle of the leaves and the creak of the old oaks. I thought about what he would have said if he had seen what Karen did to his trees. He would have been angry, certainly, but he would also have been patient. He understood that forests operate on a different timescale than human impatience. A tree takes decades to grow and minutes to cut down. The damage is fast, the healing is slow, but the healing happens. The settlement money arrived in my account in January. I used part of it to fund the next phase of the timber plan, hiring Dale to plant new trees in the areas that had been damaged. White oak seedlings, black walnut saplings, native understory species to restore the forest floor. It would take years for them to grow, decades before they reached harvestable size. But that was the nature of the promise. You plant trees not for yourself, but for the people who will come after you. In February, I received a letter from the county forestry office. The investigation was officially closed. The case file would be retained as a record of the timber trespass incident. Gerald Okonkwo had added a handwritten note at the bottom of the letter. "Ms. Chen, this was one of the more unusual cases I've handled. I'm glad it was resolved. Your father would be proud of how you protected his forest." I folded the letter and put it in the folder with the deed and the timber plan and the photographs and the settlement agreement. The evidence box, Patricia called it, the record of everything that had happened. I kept it in the fireproof safe in my office, next to the old timber plan documents with my father's handwriting on them. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I would take the folder out and look through it, not because I wanted to relive the conflict, because I wanted to remember that silence is not weakness. Patience is not passivity, and a woman with a clipboard and a confident voice can be defeated by a woman with a deed and a recorded timber plan. The Disc Golf League never came back. The HOA eventually built a new course on actual HOA property, a small 9-hole layout on a patch of open space near the community pool. It was fine. People seemed to enjoy it. I drove past it once, saw families throwing discs in the afternoon sun, and felt nothing but a quiet satisfaction. They had their course, I had my forest. And Karen Whitmore had a $15,000 lesson in the difference between assumption and ownership. On the first day of spring, I walked through the woodlot with Ethan. The new seedlings were starting to show green buds. The painted trees were still standing, their bark slowly healing around the spray-painted numbers. The stumps were softening, moss beginning to grow over the cut surfaces. "You know," Ethan said, "when I was a kid, I used to think this forest was boring, just a bunch of trees. I didn't understand why you and Grandpa spent so much time out here." He looked around at the new growth, the old oaks, the dappled light filtering through the canopy. "I get it now." I put my arm around his shoulders. "Good," I said, "because someday this will be yours, and you'll need to protect it the same way." We walked back to the gate together, father and son, through the quiet forest that had been in our family for over 50 years. The gate was closed, the lock was secure, the woodlot was healing. And somewhere in the HOA community center, a former recreation chair was still explaining to anyone who would listen that she had been treated unfairly, that the land had always been community space, that everyone knew it, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. But the records told a different story, and records, unlike opinions, do not change when the wind blows.